Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 24th episode of Viral Banter. On this week, we only have 3 campus coordinators as we are leading into exams, which we will be discussing later. But they are 3 amazing members of the Generation Liberty team who I am very lucky to have here. So let's begin with a familiar face, our campus coordinator at the University of Macquarie. Please welcome Anjali.
Hi, Renee. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And now, from one of the finest education institutions in the country, in my opinion, please welcome Elizabeth.
Hi, Renee. Super excited to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on the show again, Elizabeth. And coming from the centre of politics in Australia, in Canberra, at the Australia's National University, please welcome Connor.
Good to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on the show again, Connor. Now, has been some very interesting revelations in politics lately that we will be discussing on the show. So on Tuesday, the 27th of October, it was a cause for celebrations in Victoria as the lockdowns, or the stage 4 lockdowns, came to an end after an astonishing 112 agonizing days. Many media outlets were actually saying that Victoria was going back to a state of pretty much normalcy after this point. But Connor, we still see some restrictions around the 25 kilometre rule around your house still exists. And there are other restrictions that are still not in place in New South Wales. So what is your reaction to this? Do you think that Victoria will actually ever return to something pre-COVID normal?
Yeah, I've been quite surprised. A lot of media outlets have been calling this a new COVID normal, but I don't really quite see how it is. As you said, Victoria's been in stage 4 lockdown for over 110 days. And it's great now that people can go out to the pub and get a drink and have a meal with family and friends and do something as simple as shopping. But the fact is that these lockdowns have sent businesses to the wall. And realistically, I don't see how Victoria is going to be at any stage of good normal for a while to come. Even the World Health Organization has come out not too long ago saying that they now no longer recommend lockdowns being a primary means of control for COVID. And an envoy from the World Health Organization has said that lockdowns just have one consequence, and that's to make poor people an awful lot poorer. And so it's great now that stage 4 lockdowns have ended, and I'm not complaining about that at all. But ultimately, I think it will be a long while before this COVID normal becomes anything that resembles a good normal.
Yeah, I think you're really right there. And Anjali, throughout the press conferences, Premier Andrews has been using the mantra, I don't want to be anything other than accurate, having said accurate at least once every press conference so far. In the case of these restrictions, given the revelations that a number of these restrictions were not collaborated by Studies Health Advice, and some of the biggest decisions the Premier keeps claiming, such as, not using ADF, instead using private security, the Premier is claiming was made by a creeping assumption. Do you think that he has been precise and accurate as he has claimed?
I think that Chairman Dan Andrews claims that he's been precise and accurate at press conferences and the running of his administration is absurd. He's had a tendency to dodge questions during his press conferences. He's been evasive of criticisms about the accuracy of his statements, and he's even thrown his health minister under the bus in the process of trying to sort of evade those comments. And I think that in itself highlights his incompetence and the fact that he's telling outright lies both to Parliament but to the Victorian people. And I think that example that you raise, a prime example of the hotel quarantine catastrophe, particularly brought to light by Peter Credlin last night in her documentary investigating it, really shows that flawed decision-making process that went through Dan Andrews' decisions. It also exposes all of the political cover-ups, the fact that he said that it was very accurate that the ADF did not offer support, despite the fact that all of the evidence suggests otherwise. The email exchanges that show that he's been telling essentially bold-faced lies, because the ADF did offer to assist Victoria and he rejected that arrangement many times. So I do think that it is absurd that he is claiming that he is being precise and accurate. And I certainly think there was a legitimate reason for that Twitter hashtag that Dan lied, people died, because there is a very wide public distrust of Dan Andrews. And I think that can be seen from his claims in the conference.
Yeah, I do have to agree with you there. And it's something that I've said to even friends that I've met up with, who be like, oh, you can't be too critical of Dan, or actually I think he's done a good job. Just say, how do you explain the creeping assumption argument? Like, even if, so it, for one, on the face of it, it just sounds like a lie. But even if you believe that it was based on a creeping assumption, how do you feel that that's how government decisions are being made under his government? So either way, even if it's true, even if it's a lie, it's a really is an indictment of his government, that really important decisions, according to him, are made by creepy assumptions. I'm just generally met with silence when I kind of put that on the table. There's no real response. And I feel like, yeah, there's this real strange, I was talking about this a few weeks ago, this real strange moment of Dan Andrews supporters almost going through kind of a psychological trauma of having to realize the person that they kind of idealized may not be this great leader that they thought he was. But Elizabeth, many businesses have stated that lifting these restrictions has come far too late, or that they have not lifted enough to keep their businesses afloat. Should more be done, do you think, to ease the burden on small and medium businesses?
Absolutely. I think it's really sad, because obviously to a large extent, I think for many small businesses, the damage that's done is actually irreversible in Victoria. Restrictions have been lifted. They've come, as you said, far too late. And if anyone knows how, about running a business, is you need to be able to work. So the fact that for so long they've been unable to be operational says to me that I don't know why they should be paying any tax, at least until they can get sort of back on their feet. I think all the small businesses should have absolutely massive tax exemptions, because it's been illegal for them to operate for such a long time and for such arbitrary rules. So I don't think until they can get back on their feet, the government should be taking anything at the moment.
Yeah, and it must be such a slap in the face, especially to these businesses, for the inconsistencies. So, like, state-run, kind of publicly run gardeners were still allowed to operate during these restrictions. They were still allowed to garden public areas, but private gardeners were not allowed to.
Yeah.
So that seems like a really, really obvious inconsistency. And in my opinion, I think get the public gardeners out of the public gardens and start employing the private businesses to keep them afloat. Would seem like an obvious response to me, especially if your goal is to protect jobs, as Daniel Andrews said he was also doing throughout this process, which doesn't seem to be the case. But moving on to our what was happening in federal parliament in response to this, opposition leader Anthony Albanese issued a thank you motion in question time to praise the resilience of the Victorian people and also to thank Premier Andrews. However, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, a Victorian himself, passionately retorted that if there's any victory today, it is that the Victorian people is in the hands of the Victorian people and no one else's. Connor, I'm sure you saw that speech. What was your take on it?
Yeah, look, this motion by Anthony Albanese was merely a political play, and there to back Daniel Andrews, and probably also there to make the government look bad if they were to push against a motion thanking the Victorian people and also thanking the Premier. But what happened instead was that the Treasurer did an excellent job in turning what was clearly a political play into an honest and passionate speech about why the people of Victoria deserve all the credit for the handling of what they've had to go through this crisis, and why the losses that they've had to face have been due to the inappropriate handling of the crisis by Daniel Andrews. And certainly if anyone on the Labor benches weren't aware of the costs that the Victorian people had to endure, the Treasurer made it very, very clear. And he gave an example that seemed to be really close to his heart, that his children and the children of Victoria missed out on about 6 months of schooling, whilst other states like South Australia only lost about 2 weeks of school. And so I agree, as the Treasurer said, all the thanks belongs to the Victorian people and not to Daniel Andrews at all.
Yeah, I think it was a really, really strong response from Josh Frydenberg there. Elizabeth, what was your take on this motion and the Treasurer's response?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Connor there. I can't understand any praise coming towards Daniel Andrews and his leadership during this time. It's a bit of a joke. I mean, there's no coincidence that he's received the nickname Despot Dan, and I think it's a real disservice to Victorian people who have suffered under basically tyrannical rule for such a long time, to have sort of their work and the situation mocked by the praising of Daniel Andrew, when obviously the situation has been at his hands and his inadequate handling of the situation. So I thought it was right of the Treasurer, to point out that it's really at the credit of the Victorians and not at Daniel Andrews for any success in the state.
Yeah, I think that's very true. But Anjali, with the easing of these restrictions, pubs and restaurants can have up to 20 people indoors and 50 people outdoors, which is good news. But religious figures are appalled that ceremonies now can still have 20 people outdoors, but only 10 people indoors for weddings, plus only 20 mourners indoors for funerals. So there's been no increase there. They ask, why does the government not apply the same arbitrary numbers to religious ceremonies as it does to small businesses across the state? And what's your take on this?
I think those particular rules clearly demonstrate how social distancing restrictions on gatherings has been unfairly and disproportionately applied. And I think that is highly discriminatory. As you mentioned, religious leaders and even politicians are really calling out that unfair behavior and accuse the Premier of even, I think, mocking people of faith and singling them out. And I think it personally shows a sense of dismissiveness at people who attend places of worship, because that's actually something that's essential to their well-being. And in this regard, I think it is really unfair, especially given the fact that churches are just like restaurants or shopping centres. There can always be a potential outbreak. So the case of Victoria, for example, with Daniel Andrews essentially saying the reason why churches can't open is because they have questionable cleaning standards. The fact that churches are often cleaned on a voluntary basis, and he's feared that compared to pubs or restaurants, churches won't be cleaned to that same standard. It seems a little bit ridiculous. I'm sure religious leaders would be very happy to be subjected to more thorough cleaning standards if it meant they could open. And it really just shows that Dan Andrews loves the nanny state. He loves that heavily controlled environment. And I think it's really disappointing as well, given the fact that religious freedom is a key value of our democracy, and it's now under threat because of these particular arbitrary and disproportionate rules.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And Connor, what are your thoughts on these inconsistencies? It seems that religious freedom, something that should be, amazingly important to any leader in Australia, is one of the freedoms that state leaders in particular don't seem to care about right now. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I certainly agree. I don't think leaders really appreciate the value in religious freedoms or religious services at this point in time. And I think that's clear by the fact that pubs and restaurants are allowed more people than religious services. Very briefly, amongst the reasoning for this, if one of the arguments is that these services don't provide much, direct benefits to the economy, or as was said before, that church services might be able to clean up properly or provide proper cleaning standards, I think it ignores other real crucial benefits that religious services have and why they really should be opened up to more people, particularly when health experts have asserted that COVID has had a really unparalleled impact on people's mental health. I think being able to gather in a place where you feel safe and with other congregants who share the faith and hope that you have goes a long way to building community and also keeping people's spirits high in these times of crisis. And so in many ways, I think that can actually be more valuable than perhaps some economic input. And I really do hope that soon in the future that these religious services in Victoria in particular will be opened up to more people.
Yeah, I hope so too, Connor. And I think Daniel Andrews is really earning that name of Despot Dan or Dictator Dan right now, because it's consistently been shown throughout history that dictators and authoritarian leaders don't like church, they don't like religion, because they see it as a, competitor to their power. And that's what this could be viewed at the moment, whether that's intentional or not. That is definitely a way that you could look at this inconsistency. But Connor, we'll stick with you because you used to be a Queenslander, and this weekend was the Queensland state election, and Labor won power easily, claiming 49 seats to the LNP's 34. What are your thoughts on the claim that this election was a referendum on Labor's response to COVID-19 in Queensland?
Yeah, I haven't had a fun 2 weeks. First, we lost the election here in the ACT, and then we lost the election in Queensland as well. But look, ironically, Queenslanders are naturally conservative, and that means that they're generally less willing to change, even if that means not changing to a conservative, more conservative government. It was a line parroted by Palaszczuk throughout last week in her debates with Deb Franklinton, right? She was saying, vote for someone you know, vote for someone you trust. And of course, that was compounded by the crisis and COVID that we face this year, and the fact that in times of crisis, people are often more inclined to lean to incumbency because that's what they know. And it's better that whole saying of it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. So I think realistically, that's one of the reasons why COVID has played such a strong role in the Queensland election. Look, but I think Deb really needs to be given a lot of credit for the effort that was made during this election. I mean, the fact that she ran during 8 months of straight COVID coverage, which evidently favoured the Labor Party, I think she still did a really great job in the face of that. And as she said, hopefully in future, they'll be able to get Queensland working again.
Yeah, Connor, I think you have a real point there in regards to sitting with the incumbent, especially in Queensland, because actually historically they do actually have more of a record of yo-yoing. They are more likely to have one-term state governments. However, I think going against this trend is a response to the current climate, sticking with what they know. Seems like the move that conservative Queenslanders would actually make right now. But Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on the claims made by Labor now that Scott Morrison actually hurt the LNP campaign in Queensland by being vocally critical of the Premier or by his recent visit to the Sunshine Coast? Labor is claiming that this was seen by many Queenslanders as an outsider trying to tell them what to do or to use their the colloquialism they used, how to suck eggs, which is a colloquialism I bloody despise, by the way. But what are your thoughts on how Scott Morrison's actions or campaigning hurt or helped the LNP in Queensland?
Well, look, it's always difficult with these things to know exactly if certain comments or critiques, were the sticking point for a success or defeat of a given campaign. But obviously, he is the Prime Minister. He's going to be vocal about his criticisms. And that may or may not have impacted some people in the wrong way and might have, pushed them towards Labor, perhaps. But I certainly would disagree with the idea that he's an outsider. I mean, he's the Prime Minister. He's not just another state MP intervening. He has a vested interest in the success of the states. And so, it's, when he's travelling up there, I thought it was really great of him to point out in particular the need for Queensland to reopen their borders. Not to have them arbitrarily closed at this point in the the crisis. And that was a message that really needed to be heard by the Queensland, the government there and the Labor Party. So I think it was, it's a bit tough at the moment, the criticisms that he otherwise is receiving.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And if anything, I think the Prime Minister should have been more critical of these border lockdowns because really they are unconstitutional. It does say free and open movement between the states. It doesn't say underneath that unless there's a pandemic. Yeah. These are completely unconstitutional closures of the border, especially when we're seeing, such low rates of infection, especially on the New South Wales side. And I think it's interesting right now that this kind of pandemic is bringing up discussions around federation and state and federal power. But for me, as someone who generally was critical of how federation has formed, people are being critical of the wrong elements. So, open borders between free and open trade and open borders between the states. That's a good part of federation. And not being critical of the parts that they should be critical of, the questionable decision to get every state the same amount of senators despite population. That's something that we should be discussing. Or even on the other side of the coin, I'm seeing conservatives saying, well, the states power has run amok, so let's get rid of the states. No, that's not the right solution either. States are good. It means that we have choice of where we live in Australia. We need to go back to the questions of, if you're going to have power, then you need to have responsibility that goes with that power, which means raising your own revenue. So even though I'm kind of glad that these conversations are coming up around the power that state governments have, it seems to be the wrong conversations that are being started. But Anjali, the Greens also saw a huge swing in support in this election, retaining one seat and also unseating a Labor member to gain another seat. Do you think it's possible that this momentum could carry into federal politics as the Greens are hoping?
I think that while the Greens did enjoy this surge in popularity, significant swings in the Queensland election, I don't personally expect, at least at this stage, that they will still be the beneficiaries of this supposed search to support minor parties. I think because, first of all, their policy agenda federally strongly appeals to a specific base of individuals, and that's often climate change or immigration advocates, as well as their policies speak to some of the concerns of Labor traditional working class voters, like industrial relations. Whereas I think with the current climate of coronavirus, I'm sure more Australians, or there are more concerns by Australians about the economy, and that's probably what is on the mind of many voters nationally. In terms of that Queensland election, I think perhaps that success is partly due to the fact that the Greens have been on the rise for some time now, especially in the inner city regions of South Brisbane, where many sort of younger progressive constituents have populated that area compared to traditional Conservatives. The fact that perhaps Anthony Albanese is not as popular in Queensland, and therefore the Greens had more to gain and less to lose from this particular election. And there's also been some discussion perhaps that because the Liberal National Party did preference the Labor candidate last in all seats, meaning that the Greens would be preferenced ahead of Labor. And in a federal context, I think that the Greens policies are probably so contrary to the Liberal Party principles that I'm not sure if that kind of preference would carry over, and that they would necessarily enjoy that same kind of level of support. Specifically, as I mentioned, because of that narrow ideology that doesn't really necessarily appeal to all demographics and the needs of citizens in other states.
Yeah, I really agree there. And I also think that Greens were also successful here. Is Greens are strong when they kind of argue on a kind of localism kind of argument. There's small grassroots issues for smaller areas. So state can sometimes be successful, and they're also highly successful generally at council elections. And it's just they generally tend to struggle to bring that across to federal election campaigns. But let's move on to a different topic now. It's coming up to everyone's favorite time of year at university right now, exam time. So I thought I would ask you all how your exam preparation is going, if you have any tips, and from any of you, if you have a story from the past of an exam nightmare. So Elizabeth, let's start with you. What's your exam period? What's the exam period even like at Campion College? And do you have any stories of exam nightmares from the past?
Thanks, Renee. So at the moment, we are very fortunate at Campion College to all be on campus, as in like we have classes on campus. So we will have exams on campus as well. So we're in study week at the moment. So we have a week of no classes where we're meant to be studying for exams that will begin next week. And they'll probably go for, I think, about a couple of weeks. But we're also fortunate because a lot of subjects have oral exams as well. So often lecturers are more flexible about when we want to have those. So I suppose we just otherwise meant to be studying ahead and getting ready for those. And I have one exam nightmare, which is when in year 11, which is in my one of my VCE exams, I slept through it in the morning. So I actually had to get a call from one of my teachers saying, you missed one of your exams. But I was able to resit it later on. But it was, yes, make sure you set your alarms on the day that you have exams. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I still, the thing that annoys me is I still have like actual nightmares about exams, or about like VCAs is called in Victoria, exams, and missing them, and like, oh, I'm not even going to pass year 12. And I'm like, it's like 10 years ago now. When do these nightmares stop? Like, I still have them now. They still won't go away. And I'll wake up and I'll have to wake up, and there'll be a moment of realization. Okay, wait, no, I already did high school. High school's done. But Anjali, this is the final year of your degree. How are you feeling leading up to these exams? And do you have any stories of exam terror from the past?
Yeah, I think I'm currently in that period of the calm before the storm, because my exams or assessments are like this week and next week. So it's very intense at Macquarie University, because we don't really get a study break to actually study for exams. A lot of the humanities subjects, at least I can speak to, have their assessments in the very last week of semester, which means you're sort of going to classes for half of your units and then doing exams or assessments for the other half. So it tends to be quite intense. In terms of a exam horror story, I think it was a couple of years ago, I did a law unit where it was an online exam. And ever since I've done that exam, I've had sort of horror sort of fears that that the same issue will happen. Because what happened was we had a 3-hour exam. It was a 50% assessment online. And we were told, if you don't submit that exam within that 3-hour period, you will get 0. And of course, being the person I am, I tend to spend the most amount of time on an assessment as much as I can. So I was getting close to that deadline, and as I was about to submit, an error message comes up on Turnitin, which is the database that we use to upload our assessments, and it said, sorry, we could not submit your assignment. There's some sort of technical error. I freaked out because it was 2 minutes before the deadline, and I was thinking, if I don't get this in, I lose 50% of my grade and I fail this subject. So I literally sprinted from my bedroom to the PC in the living room, and was literally praying as I tried to upload and email myself my assessment, try and upload it back onto the database. And I got it in right on the dot. And that was, I think I've never had more adrenaline and more fear than ever before. I was literally in fight or flight mode at that stage. And I was since then, I've been so worried with any online assessment that there'll be a technical error, that I've always been very careful to try and submit it even 10 or 15 minutes before it, because that was a real horror story.
That actually, you may have actually been worrying without any need, because I've actually been told by tutors, and this is a very inside secret, and I don't know if it applies anymore because this is a few years ago, that they actually can't really tell with those online exams how long it takes you to complete them. They just say you have to do it within this long, and they make it sound really serious and you could fail. But if you took 5 hours, they would have no way of telling that you took 5 hours. It's just that they put the fear in you and pretend they're watching you. But I don't know, maybe that was also at a smaller university, so maybe at Macquarie they're still watching you. But Connor, how is your exam period going, and do you have any stories of exam terror from the past?
Oh, look, Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And I probably take that verse way too seriously when it comes to exams. I've got one on Saturday afternoon, and I'll be spending every hour in my room for the next 6 days, making sure that I do at least decently in that. So got plenty of exam stories. Hopefully I do it right, but that's the way it seems to go. My biggest exam horror story though was a grade 12 Chinese listening exam. And everyone did so poorly, even during the exam. The ducks of our grade tore up his answers because he wasn't quite happy with it. And I could almost hear the theme of that movie Platoon play in the room as we were sitting there. It wasn't a fun time, but we've gotten through it now.
That's good to hear. And thank you all for those past exam nightmares. It makes everyone listening feel that it's happened to everyone. For me, one of the particular nightmares I had is the morning of my VCE maths exam. I slammed my thumb in a sliding door and fractured my thumb. So, and this is only a few hours before. We couldn't get me into a doctor, but they could get me, like my mum took me to a pharmacist and they just put me on painkillers. So I went into a maths exam on serious painkillers, did not finish. But luckily I was in a sling and I went and saw the vice principal afterwards. And he's like, just fill out this form, just get a doctor's form. You'll just get an average of all your marks for the rest of the year. But, it was a nightmare in the morning. But once those, painkillers kicked in, even though I wasn't finishing the maths exam, I'm like, everything's fine. Everything will be fine. It's okay. But that was a particularly stressful morning for me. But since we're talking about exams, and this is the exams period, I thought I would play a little game here and give you an exam about exams. So I'm going to read out some statements about exams, and you just need to tell me if they are true or false. So do you guys have your little true or pen and paper or little true and false signs?
Yep.
So you just hold up your little signs of true or false, and we'll see who is the master of exams. So, true or false? Chinese students face up to 7 years prison for cheating on college entrance exams. Okay, everyone gets points there. That is true. You can face up to 7 years in prison for cheating on an exam in China. Okay. True or false? The entrance exam for a physics degree at the University of Malaya in Malaysia is 8 hours long. That one is false, unfortunately. It's not 8 hours long. Okay, next one. True or false? Multiple choice tests were first used in the US during World War I to test the intelligence of recruits in a more efficient manner. True or false? Okay, Connor and Anjali get points there. That is true. Okay. Said to be true or false? Said to be one of the hardest tests in the world is a test to become a commander of a Royal Navy submarine. Is this one of the hardest tests in the world? True or false? Yes, you are right. That is true. And the test is over multiple days. The people are actually left sleep deprived. They are also actually forced to drink at some times and command while hungover. And if you fail the test, you are not allowed to serve on a submarine in any capacity for the rest of your life. Wow. So it's a pretty intense test. Okay, true or false? In Sweden, students can choose the day in which they sit their exams, and they can postpone to a later date if they feel that they are unprepared.
Sure.
Yep, you are right. That is false. That would be a bit too ridiculous. True or false? A common good luck gift for Japanese students about to take exams is a Kit Kat bar. Yeah, that is all. You're all correct. That is true. It's because Kit Kat is very close to the expression kitu katsu, which translates to you will surely win. It's also apparently why there's so many different Kit Kat flavors in Japan. Like you can get green tea Kit Kats and such. Okay, true or false? The test to become a master sommelier, which is the highest level of wine expert, has had only 200 people pass it in the last 10 years. Okay, Anjali and Elizabeth, you are right there. It is false because actually only 162 people have ever passed it since its creation in 1969. So it is an incredibly hard test, which involves discerning the difference between grapes, between flavors, blindfolded, and is apparently supposed to be incredibly, incredibly difficult. So I think Anjali is in the lead here. But I'll give you one last question so someone can take this. I think Connor could still Connor or Elizabeth, you could, if you get this right and she gets this wrong, it might be a draw across the board. But this one's a personal one. True or false? I was Dux of my high school. I won't be offended by it, whichever option you choose. I was not Dux. I did all creative arts subjects, which all got marked down. Like I was going into a graphic design degree. I didn't need to be Dux. I just cruised by on like an 80. Like it was fine. It's fine. I think we've got quite a high amount of Dux amongst the coordinators, though. Are any of you amongst here were Dux of your high school? No. I think Pumica was. I have a feeling that maybe Luca was as well. And that Theodora got very, very close and was very frustrated. But thank you, Connor, Elizabeth, and Anjali, for another amazing episode of Viral Banter. And if you are not a member of Generation Liberty yet, what are you doing? It's only $10. Go to generationliberty.org.au and you will get an awesome goodie welcome bag with free books, free stickers, as well as updates on this show and updates on upcoming events, as we are starting to have events again, which is very exciting. And also updates on all things Liberty. Just become part, and you get to become part of the biggest and fastest growing youth liberty movement in Australia. So get onto it. But for now, thank you for listening and make sure that you stay happy, stay curious, and stay free.